I'm going to start this video by addressing the elephant in the room. The platform exclusivity of this game is an absolute tragedy. Fantasian feels like the lost Final Fantasy, as if in a parallel universe, Squaresoft decided to make one more PS1 Final Fantasy after FF9. And that's exactly what Fantasian is, a full-length, full-quality Final Fantasy game from the original creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, as well as potentially the last full musical score from the legendary composer Nobuo Uematsu. It's a love letter to everyone who grew up with Sakaguchi's games, especially the PS1 era Final Fantasies. Yet sadly, a majority won't be able to play it. And it's a shame because not only is the game a nostalgic callback, I feel like it's likely Mistwalker's best game yet, even surpassing Lost Odyssey. One thing you should note about Fantasian right away is that it has a fairly big scope, with the game being divided into 2 parts, each part 20 hours each, and with the second part set to be coming this fall. The game has an overworld map and dozens of environments for you to explore, and all the best Sakaguchi-isms are in this one. Airships, pretty boys, 2 women who are madly in love with you, and a whole bunch of other things you don't get to experience in real life. You take the role of Leo, and unlike any JRPG protagonist before him, he has amnesia, a genius plot device that we've never seen before. He finds himself torn between the world of humans and machines, attempting to recover his memories and stop the bacteria from destroying the human world. It's a very classic JRPG setup, one that Sakaguchi helped pioneer himself. Hell, there's even this Vincent Sephiroth looking guy. Just don't expect any groundbreaking story here, you're not gonna find it. But do expect a delightfully nostalgic one. And that's what makes Fantasian stand out amongst the crowd, is the style and charm it delivers it in. In my hours with the game, I've grown to love these characters and empathize with them through some simple, though genuinely heartfelt human stories. Speaking of which, this game has some fantastic pacing. It genuinely impresses me how fast the game is to give you a new location, and then say, we've done everything we can do here, and move on to the next one without looking back. In modern AAA video games, they're like, we spent $20 million rendering this tree, the player better spend half the game looking at it. Seriously, building game worlds has become so expensive that developers have to come up with reasons to keep you running around the same places all the time. Fantasian doesn't have this limitation, and as a result, the pacing feels brisk. Areas rarely overstay their welcome, and sometimes hours playing it feel just like minutes. When you look at Fantasian, one thing that separates it from games you probably played in the last 2 decades is that it returns to pre-rendered backgrounds of the PlayStation 1 era Squaresoft games. Unlike Final Fantasy VII's backgrounds, which use state-of-the-art CG, or many of Final Fantasy IX's backgrounds, which are primarily hand-painted, Fantasian uses diorama backgrounds. Sakaguchi's team crafted these dioramas by hand, and the result creates an extremely similar effect to the backgrounds of yore, but way more HD. Not only that, but these backgrounds smoothly pan and rotate as you turn corners in the way that the PS1 FF games could only dream of. However, what truly makes this game shine is its combat system. Just like in Final Fantasy X, the turn order is always visible, and there's no ATB meter pressuring your decisions. This is true turn-based combat at its finest. However, what makes Fantasian stand out from the rest of the pack is what happens after you've selected an attack. The game features a number of different types of AoE abilities, attacking all enemies in a straight line, in a curved line, or just blowing everything up in a radius. It may sound pretty simple, but there are some boss fights later on that really push strategy in what you're able to do in this game. Just like classic Final Fantasy, it is straightforward and streamlined. However, the depth is still there, and you'll find it during the game's more challenging boss encounters. Speaking of encounters, this game goes back to the old school random encounters of yore. The encounter rate here isn't too terrible, and you can't simply turn encounters off entirely. However, there is an alternative. You can use one of the game's more genius mechanics called the Digimon, the Dimmadome, however you pronounce it. This mechanic allows you to stack random encounters up, rounding all the enemies up into one giant battle. Then you use those same AoE abilities I mentioned earlier combined with some stat buffs to blow all enemies away at once in one quick easy battle. And maybe it's just the video game boomer in me, but I like this style more than trying to adjust my own encounter rate or turning battles off entirely and finding myself underleveled. As I mentioned earlier, this game has really fantastic pacing. Part of how it hits that stride is that it doesn't over-convolute itself with tedious grinding or confusing setup. Instead, this goes back to the basics of JRPG principles. You equip a weapon, a piece of armor, and an accessory. That's it. With leveling, unlocking your character's new skills. And yet the game feels like it has all the depth of any other RPG. Fantasian is, for that reason, such a blast to play, with the player never feeling that they're grinding away for meaningless things to progress. Then you have the music in this game, and it slaps so hard, I'm pretty sure my grandma felt it. Uematsu has composed a really incredible soundtrack for Fantasian that has its own unique flavor, although you'll definitely hear a song or two that will make you feel the Final Fantasy spirit that he lovingly crafted. It's also pretty unique. If this is the way that my king Uematsu retires from composing full soundtracks, as has been hinted in interviews, he has left us with a journey filled with some great tunes. This brings me to the most unfortunate aspect of this game is its platform exclusivity, Apple Arcade. Let me clarify here. Apple Arcade essentially works like Game Pass for people who use Apple products. You pay $5 a month and get access to their entire library, which are full video games with no gacha, ads, or microtransactions. And honestly, I think this is the future of monetization on mobile platforms. The problem is that this game is locked only to Apple platforms, including macOS and Apple TV. In Japan, this honestly makes sense, with iOS devices dominating market share. However, abroad, this locks so many people out of the experience of the full game. And while I'm sure there will be several comments on this video saying I'm just going to wait till this comes to PC, Android, or consoles, it probably isn't. I mean, it's not impossible, it's just extremely unlikely. If this game follows the same pattern as Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey, and the last story before it, the game was likely funded and published by Apple, meaning that Apple probably owns the rights to the game, and it would be their decision if the game gets ported or not. And if Microsoft, who owns the Lost Odyssey IP, won't port the games to Windows PC, their platform, I find it hard to imagine that Apple would just say, oh hey, we'll let Android and Nintendo Switch have this one. I mean, has that ever sounded like Apple to you? But with that said, Fantasian is a full-fledged JRPG in the vein of past Final Fantasy games, all made possible by its creator. And with Part 2 set to be coming fall of this year, there is more underway. And while we patiently wait for the second part, I can say if you have some means to access the game, whether it's an old iPhone or iPod Touch, borrowing an Apple TV, although they're pretty affordable, and you can connect a PS4 controller to them. However you can get your hands on this game, I'm almost certain you'll enjoy it. Fantasian is an absolute masterclass in traditional JRPG design, and is an absolute must for anyone who's grown up on Sakaguchi's work. And now, we wait for part 2. Shout out to patron Alex Thomas and the rest of the Ultima community.